Hey, noble ones, welcome to Metatron's Academy. Today, I want to do a little bit of a behind the scenes when it comes to my most successful video of this platform, which is this video here, 5 minutes of fluently spoken classical Latin, posted 1 year ago, 833,000 views. There I am. That's a nice shot, isn't it? Okay, so one thing about this video for any of you who is studying classical Latin right now is that everything I say on the video, every single word that I speak in Latin is written both in the description box here, so as I say, full Latin script for your personal study, and every single long vowel when it comes to phonemic vowel length, which is dramatically important when you study Latin, has been correctly written, and so you can double check that for every single word that I use. It's a pretty long description, and also it's been placed on a pinned comment. Yeah, it's not pinned, I'm gonna pin it now so that it's gonna be easier. Let me do that. Pin, there we go. So now it has been pinned. Now, when it comes to how this video was done, I'd like to underline that the entirety of the 5 minutes, except the very end where there is a zoom, all of this is one take. There's no jump cut. I just did one full take and spoke the entire time. Now, obviously, it's not like I use classical Latin every day, which means that in order to produce this for the previous 2 weeks, I memorized the entire script. It took me about 2 weeks, and that was in order to create the idea of the sort of fluency that a native speaker who uses Latin on a daily basis would have had. So let's check out a little bit the beginning, and then I'll tell you more about it.
Salvete, nobiles mei, ex optati revenitis ad canale meum, hic Metatron vos alloquor.
You can see here, salvete nobiles mei, ex optati revenitis ad canale meum. Obviously, canalem, you're like, yeah, but channel wasn't a thing in ancient Rome. Absolutely, but it would be considered a neologism, and these are used constantly by the, I want to say, 15,000 to 20,000 actual Latin speakers worldwide that do use Latin as a spoken language. Latin is a dead language, but that only means that it has no native speakers, but it's not dead in the sense that no one speaks it, but absolutely it is used, and they all create neologism like this, and it's absolutely fine to do it. Obviously, this word and a couple of other words here an ancient Roman wouldn't have used. I mean, at the end of the day, I do mention when it comes to the dates after Christ, so Anno Domini. Would he have known? Well, he's wearing an imperial set, so clearly he's a 1st century Roman, so after the birth of Christ, so he could have been someone who knew about him. Clearly he wouldn't have used that as a date indicator.
Hodie de lorica segmentata loquemur. Per nomen ipsum incipiemus.
Hodie, which means today, one of my favorite words in Latin. The H is slightly aspirated in Latin. De lorica segmentata loquemur. So we will speak about the lorica segmentata. The Romans didn't call it like this. In fact, if I had to make a second iteration of this, I think I would say lorica laminata. Although then again, we don't know if that's, we know that they called these plates, they called them laminae. So it makes sense to call it like that, but we have no idea. In the worst case scenario, you could just call it lorica and just leave it at that. We do know that he wouldn't have called it lorica segmentata. That's also a neologism that we have created as a form of classification or classifier when we refer to this specific type of armor.
Lorica segmentata. Num si quocatur ab antiquis Romanis. Prodolor quo pactor ecte vocaretur, hoc lorica genus a Romanis neminens scire constat. Hoc nomen lorica segmentata novatum est. Ascolaribus hominibus saeculi sexti decimi.
So I actually tell you this, I forgot about it, but I actually did tell you this, and I did say that that's not, it's something that has been created now. It's novatum est, so it's a new term, and then I tell you when.
Tamen lorica segmentata est ipsissimum genus loricae quod repente in mentem venit, quando cunque cogitemus de militibus Romanis.
Yeah, so whenever we think about the ancient Romans, that's the type of armor that comes to mind. That's what I am expressing here in Latin. Genus is another word that I absolutely love the way it sounds. See, this is difficult. I had to practice this. Look at the length of this word. Cogitemus. Cogitemus. As a modern Italian, I would tend to say cogitemus and make this one short, but the Romans both long. So cogitemus. And the S, of course, should be retracted in classical Latin pronunciation. We see the same here. Romanis.
Propterea quod saepiuscule tot stenditur, nec raro in modo cui contra chronologia rerum gestarum pugnat.
People sometimes ask, how do you know it's chronologia, for instance, or gestarum. So how do you know that the G was pronounced this way? There are ways in which a language can be reconstructed even if we don't have, of course, a recording. So we know that it's Gaio, Julio, Caesare, Octaviano, Augusto. Of course, I'm correctly inflexed in this part, regnante. So on its own, it would have been Gaius, Julius, Caesar, Octavianus, Augustus, but here is conjugated correctly. And I have a dedicated video to explain how this was achieved. We'll put a link, of course, in the description below. But we do know because they told us. And not only they told us how it was pronounced, but there are other indicators. For instance, when you have mistakes in spelling, oftentimes they are indicative to how people actually pronounce something. Because if something is a sort of spelling of convention, perhaps coming from an ancient way of writing, but then people don't pronounce it that way, then a lot of the time the mistakes will show that. It's another way. Mistakes are fantastic for recreating an ancient language. And then obviously those languages that are more conservative, such as Northern Sardinian, where the C pronounced as a K, is still a thing to this day. And as we trace instead the evolution of modern Romance languages, we can see specifically and pinpoint in time when the K sound transformed into a Ch sound, for instance, which is what we have now in both modern Italian and ecclesiastical pronunciation.
Hic autem est legionarius imperi Romani cui primo fere saeculo militabat. Gaio Iulio Caesare Octaviano Augusto regnante. Hic vero miles rei publicae militans in legione Iuli Caesaris in Gallia.
Notice Gallia with the long A that we can see once again in the script. In case you missed it, it's here. Iuli Caesaris in Gallia. Same for Caledonia. It's like these terms tend to have these long vowels.
Videlicet rei publicae legionarius lorica segmentata armatus parum historicus est.
Personally, I really like this image. I tend to use it a lot when representing a Republican soldier with this type of shield, which is kind of an earlier iteration of the scutum. I have a dedicated video to the evolution of shields and possibly their origins when it comes to 8th century BC on my main channel. Once again, link in the description, the historically focused one. And we can see they were still using not the regular metal umbo, but most likely the wooden spina. This is what this is called, which was used also to increase the structural integrity of the shield as it would avoid unnecessary bending during impact.
Secundum historicos, spatium trecentorum annorum lorica segmentata adibita est.
It's an interesting expression, isn't it? Within the space of 300 years, similar to English, if you will.
Omnibus alis saeculis lorica hamata, qua est lorica anellis perreis instructa.
This one too, the lorica hamata that I'm using here, once again, a modern term. Maybe I should have specified again, just like I did with lorica segmentata. We don't know if the Romans called it hamata, and the only reason why we call it hamata is because the hamis are their single rings. Hamus, hamis. These are the rings. And that's why, specifically for the construction of this armor, and that's why we speculated maybe that's what it was called. But we do know what they call it in period. They either just call it a thorax, so like a bust cuirass, chest cuirass, or they call it gallica, because it was in fact copied from Celtic models.
Usitatior est, apud Romanos, oportet anche esse imaginem quae ad mentem nostram rediat. Neque isto.
And so here I'm saying, like, of course, if it's not imperial period, you shouldn't imagine legionaries dressed like that.
And videmus loricam segmentata in praeclara columna Traiani depictam, haec enim columna triumpalis in foro Traiani Roma esita, monumentum ibi positum post victoria iusdem, principis Traiani victoriam in bello daco.
Recreating a bit of a proud Roman, that when he speaks about the triumphal columns, he's going to be like, yeah, this is power of Rome, glory of Rome type of thing. When it comes to the Trajan column, even though legionaries are represented, if you look at their armor, the way it's represented, and compare it to the one I'm wearing, you will see differences. For instance, my shoulder plates are clearly larger, same number, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that's coherent, but I have a larger one here, theirs don't have this characteristic, and the fastening method is very different to what I'm wearing. Does this mean that the sort of armor that I'm wearing is not coherent with this? Well, it is coherent with the actual archaeological evidence and the material goods that we have found within, as I say, the archaeological space. Whereas when it comes to this depiction, it is very possible that a lot of the things we see are to be seen as artistic conventions. For instance, look at the Cingulum. We know that they were wearing full-on military belts rather than these little ones, and sometimes even the helmets are too small. The shields tend to be smaller than what the historical data provided when it comes to material goods. So there is a lot of artistic convention in this. So you don't have to imagine that this is what exactly they looked like. My armor is more coherent than this.
Traiani depictam, haec enim columna triumphalis in foro Traiani Roma esita, monumentum ibi positum post victoria iusdem, principis Traiani victoriam in bello daco. Lorica quam hic videmus, vero ad modum speciosast, neque enim accurate veri similen, lorica segmentata reprae sentat. Eandem difficultatem percipimus in Gale iscutisque, quae nimis parva sunt.
So basically what I'm telling you here is exactly the same thing. Like, I swear I forgot that, but the helmets are sometimes too small, the shields are sometimes too small, and at the end of the day, if you make the shield full size, it might block some of the artistic details, and that could be one of the reasons. Note also that some of these legionaries have got a beard, and that's okay, because depending on the period and where they were stationed, legionaries would have a beard.
Portassis artis causa, quam obre non recte de picta sint suspicor, esse propter magnitudinem. Ut exemplum dem, scutum, quicque quod singula militum operiat.
Yeah, the idea of operiat, so you would block the entire legionary if you made the shield big enough.
Crassitudo laminarum ferrearum prorsus variabilis est in ipsa lorica, a septem decimis partibus millimetrorum ad 3 millimetra, spississimis vero laminis sumerorum, quae pars nimirum, fortissimast.
This I want to add in post-production while editing. Did you notice that I said fortissimast?
Fortissimast.
That's the contracted form of fortissima est, and it was very commonly used in all sorts of situations where the ancient Romans wouldn't fully pronounce est at the end of a sentence, but would contract it to an st. Very colloquial and absolutely coherent with the data we have.
Loricae laminae sunt innexa fiibulis orichalci, ansis aeneis.
Did you hear that? Scortes.
Lorisque scorteis.
Lorisque scorteis, yes, the Orichalci, I did say that. And if you think, are you going nuts? Are you talking about Skyrim? No, Orichalcum is a real metal that the Romans mention. And even though we are not 100% sure what it was, I think the best guess that we have of what Orichalcum was, since it kind of means mountain copper, is that it probably was brass. I think it was brass. Some people say some other kind of copper alloy. And then there are people that say it was another type of bronze with different constituents inside. I think it was brass.
Versio quam hic videtis, cupro puro utitur ad innexus laminarum corporis.
Cupro puro would be pure copper, and in fact my hinges here are pure copper, whereas these sections here are brass. So my lorica, the one I have, lorica, is steel for the plates, brass for the hinges, and pure copper for these ones here, for the connectors.
Atque orichalco ad humerus et laminas pectoris. Pondus universe a septem ad 9 kilogrammata soletesse. So
now I'm talking about the weight. I did say that, if you noticed, I did use orichalco as a translation for brass in this explanation, because that's my guess. Feel free to disagree, of course.
Lorica certo mutata ad ipsum militem, loricae forma sinit militi, magna facultatem se movendi.
Yeah, you move very well
Propter
in it.
Per multa inventa archaeologica iam compertum habemus diversis formis praevitam esse loricam hanc per imperium Romanum. Forsitam statibus evolutionis suius loricae. Ita sunt formae. Una, quae calcrise vocatur a nomine oppidi in Germania, quo eius fragmenta inventa sunt. Alias forma Corbridge typus A et B in Britannia inventa.
So Britannia, once again, is lengthening the vowel at the end, and then the Corbridge, once again, wouldn't be a term in his vocabulary, clearly, but in this case, it's like it's a Roman legionary that teleported in our present day and age, I suppose, and then now he knows what we call them. But isn't it interesting that the letter B, they pronounced be? I like it.
Forma Newstead ex Caledonia, tandem Alba Iulia. In Romania inventa.
Alba Iulia is such a beautiful name.
Forma calcrise veris militer ipsa est, quaute bantur milites cui mortui sunt, in proelio silvae Teutoburgensis.
Look at that face. Look how much he hates the Teutoburg or Teutoburg, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, Teutoburgensis, the silvae, because that's the word for the forest in Latin. In fact, you still use it in English, sylvan, I think. Yeah, that's the same origin, and that's the word silvae Teutoburgensis, and then he's mad.
Duoque genera habemus, alterum veterius, alterum moderniusculum ac multiplexius.
Yeah.
Iriquidem potesteam esse inter primas formas prototypicas.
Prototypicas. Prototypical, we still use that.
Forma corbridge pro clausurae mechanica ratione lororum scorteorum cum hamis metallicis, probabiliter visa est firmior. Typus A, lora scortea servat ad colligendas laminas pectorales ad reliquam loricam, dum typus B, utitur hamis metallicis, queu hic in mea versione verisimili potestis videre, quae est corbridge typus B.
And it is true that this was a Corbridge Type B, but I also own a Corbridge Type A, and in fact, that's the one I have now with the leather connectors instead of the copper hooks. And honestly, so much easier to put on your own than this one, let me tell you that.
E quadraginta laminis constata ec forma, apparatus collaris et humerorum constituerunt, e viginti quatuor laminis, et cingulo sedecing laminae.
Sedecing laminae, because they did call them laminae. These plates in the sources are absolutely called laminae.
Fragmenta forma eniusted qua imputeo principiorum aedifici inventa sunt, in oppidon iusted in Caledonia. Iterum nobis monstrant pauxillo mutatam formam, iam numero segmentatorum minore, ultimo quidem maximo. Alba Iulia est forma tarda, verisimiliter secundo aut tertio saeculo post Christum.
The Alba Iulia armor is, I wish we could see this one a bit more in the media, because we never see it, and it is an archaeological finding at the end of the day.
Et illa maxime differtabalis nempetardior forma, quamquam imagines quasi quidemus sunt reconstructiones hypotheticae.
They are hypothetical reconstructions, absolutely, because we don't have a full set, but we do have images of it. It's still nice to see it.
Inter commoda huius generis lorica uno est eius potestatem protegendi legionari humeros perbene. Oportet nomme minis escutum Romanum, quod est satis magnum, primum praesidium est militi. Axi reecte adibebitur, protectionem optimam, praebebit asura, usque ad claviculam.
And that's the
nobiles
end.
mei. Spero foreut haec pellicula tibi plaquerit.
Pellicula is another neologism, of course, to translate a video, and of course, nobiles mei. I mean, my noble ones, kind of my nobles, it would be the translation. It's how we decided to render noble ones that I always use. Yeah, I mean, the term exists. It's just that probably would have only been used by some emperor or some senator speaking to the aristocrats if he really wanted to in a specific context. It's not necessarily a neologism, but
Et si ita memento te, pollice probando favendum, subscribendusque esse meo canali ad plura Metatronis, et memento te, Metatron suas alas pansit.
Metatron suas alas pansit, which is Metatron spread his wings. Once again, my personalized message at the end that I usually say. I've been saying for frigging 12 years now. And yeah, of course, subscribendusque, not something you would do unless you wanted to subscribe, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that one is neologism too.
Valete.
Valete. Okay, so I think it's still a nice video and a nice resource for those people. And we are ready as a team to justify, because I did this in collaboration with Luc Ranieri, and we are ready to justify every single pronunciation choice, both when it comes to vowels, to consonants, to length, to translation, to the words apparatus. It's such a good word. And yeah, so even not only the length of the vowels, but even the quality, because we decided, this was very, very well engineered, I want to say. Sorry if I say that myself, I don't want to sound, but again, we did it as a team, so I'm more like commending them than me. But I do want to say, even the vowels, when we decided when it comes to the quality, are we going to go for a closed vowel, slightly mid? Maybe we went for true mids rather than very open vowels or very closed vowels, for those of you who are into these details. Perhaps we could speak more about it and how the decisions we made. I might make even a version where I just read it, so we don't have the music and I just read it. Could be let me know if you're interested in that. But for today, that's what I wanted to share. So thank you very much for watching. And as always, gratias tibi ago. Valete.